The smell of cinnamon and nutmeg is supposed to mean home. It's supposed to mean warmth, safety, and the kind of memories that stay with you long after the fire in the hearth has gone out. But as I sat there in my son's dining room, watching my daughter-in-law, Tiffany, slide a steaming bowl of homemade sweet potato pie toward me, that scent felt like a burial shroud. She was smiling, that bright, manufactured smile she used whenever she wanted something. A new SUV, a renovation for the kitchen, or in this case, my life. "Eat up, Cyrus," she said, her voice like honey poured over a razor blade. "I made it just for you. Extra brown sugar, exactly how you like it." I looked down at the orange mash. It looked perfect. It looked innocent. But I've spent 40 years in the trades. I've spent 4 decades crawling through crawl spaces and inspecting the guts of buildings. I know when something is off. I know when a structure is failing before the first crack even appears in the drywall. And right now, the air in this room was thick, with the smell of a collapse. I didn't reach for the spoon. Not yet. I looked at my son, Tyson. He was sitting across from me, staring intensely at his wine glass. At 32, he still had the same soft features he'd had as a boy, but they were sagging under the weight of a debt he thought I didn't know about. He wouldn't look me in the eye. He hadn't looked me in the eye since I arrived 3 hours ago for Christmas Eve dinner. "Dad?" Tyson's voice was thin, brittle. "Everything okay? You usually dive right into the pie." I let a small, tired smile touch my lips. The kind of smile a man gives when he's being underestimated. "Just taking it in, son. It's not every day I get a home-cooked meal like this." I knew what was in that bowl. I didn't need a lab kit to tell me. An hour earlier, I had excused myself to find the restroom, but I'd taken a detour through the service hallway that led to the kitchen. I'd heard the frantic, hushed whispering. I'd seen, through the narrow crack of the swinging door, Tiffany standing over that very bowl, a mortar and pestle in her hand. She wasn't grinding spices. She was grinding blue pills, my pills. High-potency beta blockers for the arrhythmia I'd developed 3 years ago. I'd watched her dump a massive, lethal dose of that fine blue powder into the pie filling. I'd heard her tell Tyson that it would look like a natural heart attack. I'd heard my own flesh and blood, the boy I'd raised alone after my Beatrice passed away, ask if it would be quick. He didn't ask if it was right. He only asked if it would be fast. I reached under the heavy linen tablecloth, my calloused fingers finding the familiar shape of my phone in my pocket. I didn't have to look at the screen. I'd lived a life of precision, and my thumb knew exactly where the keys were. I typed out a short, coded message. It was a sequence I'd prayed I would never have to use. Then, I looked back at the woman who wanted me dead for the sake of an inheritance she hadn't earned. To the world, I'm Cyrus Blackwood, a retired HVAC contractor who lives in a modest ranch-style house in a neighborhood that's seen better days. I drive a 10-year-old Ford truck with a dent in the tailgate. I buy my flannel shirts in 3 packs, and I keep my boots until the soles are worn smooth. People look at me and see a man who worked hard and retired with just enough to get by. They see a poorman who doesn't understand the modern world of cryptocurrency and luxury branding. What they don't see, what even Tyson didn't know, is that for 40 years, I took every extra cent I made and put it into dirt. I bought the lots no one wanted. I acquired the commercial warehouses in the industrial districts before they became trendy lofts. I built a real estate portfolio worth north of $50 million, all held under a series of anonymous trusts. I didn't do it because I was greedy. I did it because I wanted to see if my son could become a man without the shadow of a checkbook hanging over him. I thought I was teaching him the value of $1. Instead, it seems I only taught him to resent the man who held them. "Cyrus?" Tiffany's voice was sharper now, the honey starting to thin. "Is it cold? I can reheat it for you." "No," I said, finally picking up the silver spoon. It felt heavy in my hand, like a lead pipe. "No, it's just right. You've really outdone yourself this year, Tiffany. This house, this meal, it's quite a display." I looked around the room. The chandelier above us was a monstrosity of crystal that cost more than my first 3 trucks combined. The walls were covered in designer wallpaper, and the rug beneath our feet was a Persian import. I knew, based on the secret audits I'd been running for months, that they hadn't paid the mortgage in 90 days. I knew their credit cards were maxed out to the limit of their high-interest heavens. They were drowning in a sea of luxury, and they thought my death was the only life raft left. "We just want you to be comfortable, Dad," Tyson said, finally looking up. His eyes were glassy. He'd had too much to drink, but not enough to numb the guilt. "You've worked so hard your whole life. You deserve the best." The best, I repeated, nodding slowly. That's a funny word. I used to tell you, Tyson, when you were just a sprout, that the best things in life aren't things at all. They're the people you can trust when the lights go out. The irony was so thick I could almost taste it, even before the pie. I lifted a spoonful of the orange mash, the steam hitting my face. I could see Tiffany's knuckles turning white as she gripped her wine glass. She was leaning forward, her breath held, waiting for the moment the poison crossed my lips. She was salivating for the equity in my home, for the life insurance policy she thought was the only thing I had left to my name. I didn't know it yet, but the next 60 seconds would determine the rest of my life. I brought the spoon closer. I could see the tiny microscopic grains of blue powder that hadn't quite dissolved into the sugar. I wondered if Tyson remembered the time I'd stayed up with him for 3 nights straight when he had the flu, or the time I'd worked double shifts for 6 months just to pay for his club soccer travel. Probably not. Those memories don't pay the bill for a leased Mercedes. I let the spoon hover just an inch from my mouth. You know, I said, my voice dropping to a low, conversational tone. I was thinking about your mother today. Beatrice always said that Christmas is a time for truth, no matter how much it hurts. Dad, please, Tyson whispered. Just eat the pie. I saw his hand shake. I saw the beads of sweat on his forehead. He was a coward, through and through. He didn't have the stomach to kill me himself, so he let his wife do the heavy lifting while he watched from the sidelines. I dropped the spoon. It clattered against the porcelain with a sound like a gunshot. The orange filling splattered onto the white tablecloth, a bright, ugly stain. I let out a sharp, guttural gasp and grabbed my chest. I didn't have to fake the pain in my heart. The betrayal was doing that for me, but I played the rest of it like a seasoned pro. I let my eyes roll back. I let my body go stiff. I knocked over the water glass, the ice cubes skittering across the table like diamonds. Cyrus! Tiffany shrieked, but she didn't move to help me. She didn't reach for her phone to call Chinchumwe Mort. I slid out of the chair, my body hitting the hardwood floor with a heavy, sickening thud. I made sure to let my head loll to the side, my mouth hanging open, my breathing coming in shallow, wheezing hitches. I lay there, my face pressed against the cold wood, and I waited. I waited to see if my son would save me. Is he gone? Tiffany's voice was hushed now, filled with a terrifying kind of excitement. I don't know, Tyson stammered. I heard the scrape of his chair as he stood up. He walked over to me, his footsteps heavy and hesitant. I felt him kneel beside me. He didn't check my pulse. He didn't start CPR. He just stared. Tiff, he's still breathing. We have to call someone. Wait, she hissed. Wait a minute. The pills take time to work. If the paramedics get here too soon, they might stabilize him. Give it 5 minutes. Just 5 minutes, Tyson. He's my father, Tiffany. He's a bank account, she snapped back. A bank account that's about to close. Do you want to lose the house? Do you want those guys from the city coming back for the money you owe? This is it. This is our only way out. The room went silent, except for the sound of my own labored, faked breathing. I lay there, listening to the clock ticking on the mantel, counting the seconds of my son's final betrayal. He was choosing the crystal chandelier over the man who gave him life. I felt a coldness settle into my bones that had nothing to do with the floor. The Omega Protocol had been activated the moment I sent that text. My team, the men who actually knew who Cyrus Blackwood was, were already moving, but they wouldn't arrive in time to stop what happened next. Tyson reached down. He didn't touch my face. He reached for my pocket. He pulled out my wallet, his fingers fumbling with the leather. What are you doing? Tiffany whispered. Checking for the safe key, Tyson muttered. He keeps it in here. If he dies, I need to get into the office before the lawyers show up. He found the key. I felt it leave my person. And then the front door didn't just open. It was kicked in. But it wasn't the police. It wasn't my security team. It was 2 men in dark hoodies, their faces obscured. And they weren't looking for a sick old man. They were looking for the money Tyson had promised them, money he didn't have. One of them pointed a heavy black pistol at Tyson's head. Where's the payment, Tyson? The man growled. You said tonight. You said the old man would be taken care of. I lay on the floor, my eyes shut, my heart hammering against my ribs. I had prepared for a betrayal from my family, but I hadn't prepared for the wolves to be at the door before the body was even cold. The cliffhanger wasn't whether I would survive the poison. The cliffhanger was whether I would survive the people my son had brought into my world. The coldness of the hardwood floor against my cheek was nothing compared to the ice that settled in my soul as I listened to the exchange above me. I lay there, perfectly still, my eyes squeezed shut to hide the clarity within them. I had spent decades in the field, surviving job site accidents and cutthroat business deals, but nothing prepares you for the sound of your own son bargaining with your life while you're supposedly taking your last breaths. The man with the gravelly voice, the one holding the gun, didn't sound like he was in the mood for a Christmas miracle. The metallic click of a hammer being cocked back echoed in the sudden silence of the room. It's a sound that stays with you, sharp and final. "I told you, Tyson," the voice growled. "Viper doesn't do extensions. You said the old man was a sure thing. You said the equity would be liquid by the end of the month. But here I am, standing in a house full of overpriced furniture, looking at a guy who's still breathing." "He's dying." Tiffany's voice was high, frantic, and filled with a desperate kind of greed that made my skin crawl. "Look at him. He's having a massive coronary right now. He didn't even finish the pie. We didn't call the ambulance yet because we wanted to make sure everything was in order. I didn't know it yet, but my son had dug a hole much deeper than a simple mortgage default. He hadn't just borrowed money. He had sold my death to the highest bidder. He looks like he's just sleeping," the second intruder muttered. I heard his heavy footsteps come closer. A boot nudged my ribs, not a kick, but a test. I didn't flinch. I kept my muscles slack, my breathing shallow and rhythmic, just like the medic training I'd taken 30 years ago for job site emergencies. "If he doesn't kick the bucket tonight, Tyson, you're the one going in the ground. Viper wants his pound of flesh, and he doesn't care whose name is on the ID. Please," Tyson whimpered. I could hear him shuffling on his knees, probably groveling at their feet. It was a pathetic sound. "He's got a safe in the office. I just got the key. There's got to be something in there, deeds, bonds, jewelry. Just give me 10 minutes to open it. If I can't find 50 grand in there, then do what you have to do." I felt a surge of cold fury. The key Tyson had snatched from my pocket was for a small fireproof box in my office, a decoy I'd set up years ago. Inside that box wasn't $50,000. It was a collection of his old school reports, his first baseball glove, and a photo of him as a toddler sitting on my shoulders. It was a box of memories, a vault of the love I'd poured into a child who was now trading my body for time. As Tyson scrambled toward the office with the intruders close behind, leaving me on the dining room floor, my mind raced. The Omega protocol I had triggered was more than just a call for help. It was the mobilization of a private security firm I'd quietly funded through one of my holding company's men I'd served with, men who knew how to handle wolves, but they were 10 minutes out. In this house, in this moment, I was alone with the monsters I had inadvertently helped create. How did it come to this? How does a man raise a son who thinks of him as nothing more than a series of numbers on a balance sheet? I started seeing the signs 5 years ago, right after Beatrice passed. Tyson changed. It was subtle at first, the way he stopped asking about my health and started asking about the maintenance costs of my properties. He met Tiffany at a high-end charity gala he'd crashed, and she saw him as a ticket to a world he didn't actually belong to. She was a woman who lived for the aesthetic, and Tyson was all too willing to buy it for her on credit. I remembered a dinner we had 2 years ago. Tyson had come to me, crying, saying he needed $100,000 to pivot his consulting business. I'd looked at his tailored suit and his gold watch, and I'd said no. I told him he needed to build his own foundation, that I wouldn't give him a shortcut to a life he couldn't sustain. He had stormed out, calling me a selfish old hoarder. I didn't know it then, but that no was the moment he decided I was an obstacle to be removed, rather than a father to be loved. From the other room, I heard the sound of the office door being kicked open, the heavy thud of furniture being moved. Then, the shrill, frustrated scream of Tiffany. "A baseball glove? Are you kidding me, Tyson? This is what's in here? Old papers and a toy?" "There has to be more." Tyson's voice was cracking, reaching a pitch of pure hysteria. "He's a millionaire. I've seen the tax assessments on his properties. He's hiding it. Dad, where is it?" I heard him running back into the dining room. I felt his hands grab my shoulders, shaking me violently. He wasn't checking if I was okay. He was trying to rattle the secrets out of a man he thought was a corpse. "Wake up, you old bastard. Where's the money? Where are the real deeds?" I didn't open my eyes. I didn't move. But internally, the poor contractor was gone. The man who had navigated the shark-infested waters of Atlanta real estate for 4 decades was now fully online. One of the intruders laughed a dry, cynical sound. "He's not waking up, kid. He's gone gray. You've been playing us, Tyson. You told us he was the whale, but it looks like you're just a minnow with a dying dad and a lot of debt." "Wait," Tiffany said. Her voice had changed. It was suddenly calm, cold. The deed to this house is in Tyson's name. We did the paperwork last month. Cyrus signed it." My heart skipped a beat. I had never signed a deed transfer. If there was a paper with my signature on it, it was a forgery. A felony forgery. "If we give you the deed," Tiffany continued, "you can flip it. The land alone is worth $1 million. Just take the house and let us go. We'll say the old man was robbed by someone else. We'll give you the security footage. We'll wipe the last hour." The intruder seemed to consider this. "You'd sign over your own home while your old man's body is still warm on the rug? You two are cold. I like that." "It's survival," Tiffany whispered. I listened to them move back toward the table, shuffling papers. I knew exactly which document they were looking at. It was a fraudulent quitclaim deed they must have prepared weeks ago, waiting for this exact moment. They were about to hand over my home, the house I'd built with my own hands for Beatrice, to a group of professional killers. But there was one thing they didn't know. I'm a man of systems. I don't just own buildings. I own the infrastructure. When I renovated this house for Tyson, I didn't just put in new cabinets. I installed a smart home system that was entirely separate from the main grid, controlled by a secure server in my own basement back at my ranch. With a subtle movement, my hand brushed the floor. I wasn't reaching for a weapon. I was reaching for a small, tactile button hidden under the edge of the dining room sideboard, a panic trigger I'd installed myself while fixing their baseboards last summer. I pressed it. The lights in the house didn't just go out. They didn't flicker. They engaged a high-intensity strobe sequence designed to disorient and blind anyone in the room. Simultaneously, a piercing, high-frequency alarm, the kind they use for riot control, tore through the air. The intruders screamed. I heard the sound of a gun discharging a wild, panicked shot that shattered a vase on the mantel. "What is this? What's happening?" Tyson wailed. In the chaos, I didn't stay on the floor. I rolled, moving with a speed that would have shocked my son. I used the strobe flashes to track the movement in the room. I saw the man with the gun covering his eyes, stumbling back. I didn't go for him, not yet. I moved toward the kitchen, toward the breaker panel. But as I reached the door, I felt a hand grab my ankle. It was Tiffany. Even in the blinding light and the ear-splitting noise, she had seen me move. Her eyes were wide, and for the first time, she wasn't looking at me with boredom. She was looking at me with the realization that the old man had been a lie. She didn't scream for help. She didn't call for the police. She reached for the steak knife that had fallen off the table during my collapse. "You," she hissed, her voice barely audible over the alarm. "You've been playing us the whole time. You're not dying." She lunged. I parried the blow with the instinct of a man who'd spent his youth in the boxing gyms of East Atlanta. I grabbed her wrist, twisting it until the knife clattered to the floor. I looked into her eyes, and I saw no soul there, just the hunger for things she hadn't earned. "The pie was a nice touch, Tiffany," I said, my voice cutting through the noise like a serrated blade. "But you should have used more sugar." I could taste the bitterness from across the room. I shoved her back into the strobe-lit darkness. The front door burst open again. This time, it wasn't a kick. It was an explosion. Flashbangs detonated in the foyer, followed by the heavy, rhythmic thud of tactical boots. My team had arrived. "Clear, clear, secure the principals." The intruders were on the floor in seconds, pinned by men who didn't care about their Viper connections. Tyson was curled in a corner, sobbing, his hands over his ears. The lights returned to a steady, calm glow. The alarm cut off, leaving a ringing silence that was even more deafening. I stood in the center of the room, my flannel shirt wrinkled, my hair a mess, but my posture as straight as a steel beam. I looked at the wreckage of the dining room, the shattered crystal, the splattered pie, the forged deed lying in a pool of spilled wine. Reggie, my lawyer and oldest friend, stepped into the room. He was wearing a tactical vest over his expensive suit, looking like the man who'd once pulled me out of a collapsing trench in Baimubon. He looked at the scene, then at me. "You okay, Cyrus?" "I'm fine, Reggie," I said, wiping a smudge of sweet potato from my hand. "But we have a problem." "What's that?" I pointed to Tyson, who was looking up at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated horror. He saw the security team. He saw Reggie. He saw me standing there, very much alive and in control. "My son thinks he's going to jail for a botched robbery," I said, my voice cold. "But that's not enough. He tried to sell my life. Now, I'm going to buy his." I walked over to the table and picked up the forged deed. I looked at the signature, the shaky, pathetic attempt to mimic my handwriting. "Reggie," I said, "call the bank. I want to buy every single piece of debt Tyson and Tiffany have ever touched. Every credit card, every car loan, every cent they owe to Viper Capital. I want to own them, completely." Tyson looked at me, his lip trembling. "Dad, please. They were going to kill us. We had no choice." I leaned down, getting close to his face. I didn't see my son anymore. I saw a failed structure, a building that needed to be condemned. "You had a choice every day for the last 30 years, Tyson," I whispered, "and you chose tonight." I turned to Reggie. "And there's one more thing. That message I sent you, the one about the Omega Protocol." "Yeah?" I lied, I said. "That wasn't the protocol for help. That was the protocol for the liquidation." Reggie's eyes widened. "Cyrus, you don't mean—" "I mean," I said, looking at the house Tyson had loved more than his own father, "that by sunrise, this house, the cars, and everything in them will belong to a charity for abandoned dogs. And Tyson and Tiffany, they're about to find out what it's like to live in the basement of the world." But as I spoke, I noticed something. Tiffany wasn't on the floor with the others. The back door was ajar, swinging gently in the winter breeze. I realized then that the war wasn't over. Tiffany hadn't just run. She had something in her hand when she left, something she'd grabbed from the office floor during the strobe light chaos. It wasn't the baseball glove. It was the black ledger I'd kept in the hidden compartment of the safe, the one that contained the real names and addresses of every silent partner in my $50 million empire. What happened next changed everything, because Tiffany didn't go to the police. She went to the only people more dangerous than the men who had just been arrested. She went to my competition. The silence that followed the tactical team's departure was heavier than the noise of the flashbangs. It was the kind of silence you find in a graveyard at 3 a.m, cold, absolute, and smelling of damp earth. Reggie stood by the shattered front door, his silhouette framed by the flashing blue and red lights of the patrol cars outside. He looked at me, then at the empty space, where Tiffany had been standing only minutes before. He didn't have to say a word. I knew exactly what was missing. "The ledger," I whispered. My voice sounded like dry leaves skittering over a tombstone. Reggie's face hardened. He knew what that book meant. It wasn't just a list of properties or bank accounts. It was the blueprint of a shadow empire. It contained the names of the silent partners, the offshore trust keys, and the leverage I'd spent 40 years collecting on the men who really ran this city. In my hands, it was a shield. In Tiffany's hands, it was a map to my throat. "She's fast, Cyrus," Reggie said, stepping over a piece of broken crown molding. "But she's panicked. She won't know who to go to first. We can block the exits, freeze her accounts, put a bird in the sky to find that Mercedes." "She won't go to a bank, Reggie," I said, walking toward the window. I watched a tow truck pull my stolen Ford truck into the driveway, part of the theater of my return. "She's smarter than Tyson. She knows that ledger is a currency. She'll go to the only man who's been trying to buy me out for a decade. She'll go to Sterling Vance." Vance. Just saying the name made my jaw ache. He was the gilded wolf of Atlanta real estate, a man who wore $5,000 suits but had the soul of a street-level shakedown artist. He'd been trying to find a crack in my foundation for years, and now, my own daughter-in-law was handing him the sledgehammer. I turned back to the room. Tyson was still on the floor, huddled against the sofa. He looked small, not just physically, but spiritually. It was as if the core of the man had simply collapsed, leaving behind a hollow shell of skin and bone. He looked at me, and for a fleeting second, I saw the 5-year-old boy who used to wait for me at the front door when I came home from a long shift covered in insulation and grease. I didn't know it then, but my mercy was about to become my greatest liability. "Dad," he croaked. He reached out a trembling hand, his fingers stained with the red ink from the fraudulent deed. "Dad, please, you have to believe me. I didn't want to do it. She said we were going under. She said you wouldn't help us because you were holding on to everything for yourself. She made me feel like I was a failure every single day." I walked over to him, my boots clicking rhythmically on the floor. I didn't stop until the toes of my boots were inches from his face. I didn't feel anger anymore. Anger is a hot emotion. It burns out. This was something different. This was the cold, sterile clarity of a contractor looking at a load-bearing wall that had been eaten away by termites. There was no fixing this. There was only demolition. "You are a failure, Tyson," I said, my voice devoid of any inflection. "But not because you were broke. You're a failure because you let a woman convince you that my life was the price of your comfort. You're a failure because you watched her grind those pills, and you didn't throw the bowl against the wall. You just sat there and calculated the timeline." "I was scared," he wailed. "I was scared in Bai Mui Hai," I snapped, leaning down. "I was scared when your mother was dying and the medical bills were piling up, and I had to decide whether to pay the mortgage or the oncologist. But I didn't kill anyone, Tyson. I worked. I crawled through attics until my knees bled. I built something so you would never have to feel that kind of fear. And what did you do with that gift?" I gestured to the room, the expensive, empty, fraudulent room. "You traded your soul for a lifestyle you couldn't afford, and then you tried to trade my heart to keep it. You aren't my son anymore. You're just a bad investment I'm finally writing off." I looked at Reggie. "Take him to the basement of the ranch. No police. Not yet. I want him to sit in the dark for a while. I want him to feel the weight of the dirt he tried to put me under." "And Tiffany?" Reggie asked, as two of his men hauled Tyson to his feet. "Let her go to Vance," I said, a dark idea beginning to form in the back of my mind. "If she wants to play in the big leagues, I'm going to let her. But she doesn't realize that the ledger she took is missing the final chapter, the one where the wolf gets trapped in his own den." As they dragged Tyson out, his screams for forgiveness fading into the night, I felt the ghost of my wife, Beatrice, in the room. I could almost see her standing by the mantel, her eyes filled with the same disappointment that was currently hollowing me out. She had always been the soft one. She'd told me I was too hard on him, that I expected too much. "He's just a boy, Cyrus," she'd say. "He needs to find his own way." Well, he found it. It led right to a bowl of poisoned pie. I walked into the kitchen, the one room in this house that felt somewhat real. I opened a cabinet and found a bottle of cheap Scotch Tyson kept for the help. I poured myself a glass, not caring about the hour or the arrhythmia. I needed something to steady the vibration in my hands. I started thinking about the early years. The way Tyson used to follow me around the job sites. I'd give him a small hammer and a box of nails, and he'd spend hours fixing the scrap wood while I installed ductwork. He was a good kid then. What happened? When did the rot start? Maybe it was the private school I'd paid for, where he rubbed shoulders with the sons of old money who looked down on him because his father smelled like sweat. Maybe it was the way I'd tried to shield him from the struggle, making sure he never saw the nights I sat at the kitchen table with a calculator and a pile of past due notices, wondering if we'd have enough for the electric bill. I'd wanted him to have the world. Instead, I'd given him the belief that the world owed him everything. My phone buzzed on the counter. It was a private number. I knew before I answered that it wasn't the police. "Cyrus," the voice on the other end was smooth, like expensive velvet draped over a graveyard. It was Sterling Vance. "I have to say, I'm impressed. I always knew you were a stubborn old goat, but I didn't think you'd survive your own retirement party. You've got quite a daughter-in-law. She's sitting in my study right now, and she has some very interesting bedtime stories to tell me." I took a sip of the scotch. It burned, but it felt honest. "She's a thief and a murderer, Sterling. If you're keeping company with her, your standards have dropped even lower than I thought." Vance laughed. "Oh, I don't care about her morals, Cyrus. I care about the Blackwood ledger. She's already shown me the first 3 pages. The judge in the 4th District, the offshore accounts in the Caymans. You've been a very busy man for a simple HVAC contractor." "It's a long book, Sterling," I said. "Make sure she shows you the end. It's the best part." "She wants $10 million for the book and a ticket out of the country," Vance said, his tone turning clinical. "I'm thinking of giving it to her. Not because I like her, but because once I own those names, you're done. I'll dismantle your holdings by noon tomorrow. You'll be exactly what you've been pretending to be, a broke old man in a dusty truck." "Then do it," I said. "But ask yourself one thing, Sterling. If I'm smart enough to build a $50 million empire without anyone noticing for 40 years, why would I leave a ledger like that in a safe my son had the key to?" There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the gears grinding in Vance's head. He was a shark, But sharks are predictable. They react to blood. They don't think about the hook hidden inside the bait. "What are you saying?" Vance asked, his voice losing some of its velvet. "I'm saying that Tiffany didn't steal my ledger," I whispered. "She stole my trap. Every name in that book, Sterling, every account, every piece of leverage, it's real. But it's all connected to a federal investigation I've been cooperating with for 18 months. The moment you use that information, the moment you try to move a single cent or call a single judge, you're not taking my empire. You're walking into a RICO indictment." I heard a muffled sound, the sound of someone's breath hitching. "You're bluffing," Vance hissed. "Am I? Check the 4th page, Sterling. The one about the warehouse on 9th Street. Look at the permit numbers. Then call your lawyer and ask him what happens when a developer unknowingly buys a property that's been designated as a federal evidence locker." I hung up. I didn't know if it would work. In truth, I was half bluffing. The investigation was real, but it wasn't nearly as far along as I'd claimed. But I knew Vance. He was paranoid. He'd spent his whole life breaking the law, and he'd spend the next 6 hours terrified of the paper in his hand. I looked at the clock. Bone. Hum. A.M. The Omega Protocol wasn't over. It was just shifting into Phase 3. I had to get to Vance's estate before Tiffany realized she was holding a ticking time bomb. Because once she knew the ledger was useless, she'd go back to the only thing she knew how to do. She'd try to finish the job she started at the dinner table. What happened next changed the stakes of the game entirely. As I walked out of the house, heading for my truck, a black SUV pulled into the driveway, blocking my path. A man I'd never seen before stepped out. He wasn't one of Reggie's men. He was wearing a medical uniform, and he was holding a tablet. "Mr. Blackwood?" he asked. "Who are you?" "I'm with the Forensic Toxicology Unit," he said, his face grim. "We just finished analyzing the sample of the pie your security team brought in. We found the beta blockers, as expected, but we found something else, too." My heart hammered. What else? "A high-concentration synthetic toxin. Something that doesn't show up on standard screens. It wasn't in the pills, Mr. Blackwood. It was in the crust. Tiffany didn't just put medicine in your dessert. Someone else had already poisoned the ingredients before she even touched them." I froze. My mind spun. If Tiffany wasn't the only one trying to kill me, who else was in that kitchen? The real ghost wasn't the man they tried to kill. It was the person who had been standing in the shadows, watching them fail, and waiting for their turn. The toxicologist's words felt like a physical blow to the back of my neck. I stood there, the cool night air suddenly feeling like a vacuum, sucking the oxygen right out of my lungs. I looked at the small, glowing screen of the tablet he held, showing a chemical breakdown that looked like a jagged mountain range of death. "The filling was amateur hour, Mr. Blackwood," the man said, his voice clinical, detached from the horror of the situation. "High-dose beta blockers. It would have been messy, unpredictable, and potentially survivable if you got to a hospital fast enough. But the crust? Someone infused the flour with a synthetic neurotoxin derived from aconitine. It's odorless, tasteless, and it doesn't wait for your heart to skip a beat. It shuts down the respiratory system in minutes. If you'd taken even a single bite of that crust, you wouldn't have had time to fake a collapse. You'd have been dead before you hit the floor." I didn't know it yet, but my daughter-in-law wasn't the shark in this water. She was just the pilot fish, following a much larger predator I hadn't even noticed. I turned and walked back into the house, my boots crunching on the glass shards in the foyer. The police were busy loading the vultures into vans, but I didn't care about the small-time crooks anymore. I went straight to the kitchen trash can, the one Tiffany had been using earlier. I tipped it over, spilling the remains of their perfect Christmas Eve onto the designer tile. Underneath the empty wine bottles and the discarded wrapping paper, I found it, a crumpled, high-end pastry box from a boutique bakery in Buckhead. There was a small, handwritten note taped to the inside of the lid. "For the special occasion, make sure he enjoys every crumb. L." My blood turned to slush. I knew that handwriting. It wasn't the elegant, loopy script of a socialite or the blocky print of a thug. It was precise, slanted, and familiar. It was the handwriting of Leo Thorne, my former head of acquisitions. I'd fired Leo 3 years ago for skimming from the commercial rental accounts. I'd been merciful then, too. I didn't call the police. I just took back the keys to his company car, stripped him of his bonuses, and told him to never show his face in this city again. I thought I'd broken him. I thought he was a footnote in the history of Blackwood Holdings. Instead, It seemed Leo Thorne had been playing a much longer game. He hadn't just disappeared, he'd infiltrated my family. He'd found the weakest link in my chain, Tiffany, and he'd turned her into a weapon. "Reggie!" I shouted, my voice echoing through the hollowed-out house. Reggie appeared in the doorway, his face grim. "What is it, Cyrus?" "I'm trying to coordinate with the precinct to make sure Tyson's statement is recorded before he loses his nerve." "Forget Tyson for a second," I said, holding up the bakery box. "Look at the note. Leo Thorne is back. He's the one who gave Tiffany the ingredients. He wasn't just helping her, he was ensuring there were no witnesses. He wanted me dead, but I'm willing to bet he wanted Tiffany and Tyson to take the fall for a murder they didn't even realize was an assassination." Reggie took the box, his eyes scanning the note. He let out a low whistle. "Thorne, that bastard. If he's back, then the ledger Tiffany took. It's not just a bluff anymore. He'll know which names are real and which ones are distractions. He was the one who helped you set up the shadow trusts, Cyrus. He knows where the bones are buried." The stakes had just shifted from a family tragedy to a corporate massacre. If Leo Thorne and Sterling Vance were in a room together with that ledger, they wouldn't just take my money. They'd burn my entire legacy to the ground, and they'd use the names in that book to ensure I spent the rest of my life in a federal cell. "Get the car," I said. "We're going to Vance's estate, now." "Cyrus, you can't go in there like a cowboy," Reggie warned. "Vance has a private security force that makes my team look like mall cops. If Thorne is there, it's a fortress." "I'm not going in as a cowboy, Reggie," I said, walking toward the door. "I'm going in as the man who built the fortress." The drive to Vance's estate was a blur of streetlights and rising adrenaline. I sat in the back of the black SUV, watching the city I'd helped build flicker past the window. Every skyscraper, every renovated warehouse, every hidden lot, I felt the weight of it all. I'd spent 40 years being the invisible man, the ghost in the machine. I'd stayed small so I could grow big. And now, the very invisibility I'd cultivated was being used against me. What happened next changed the way I looked at my own son forever. My phone buzzed. It was a link to a secure video feed from the basement of my ranch, where my men had taken Tyson. I opened the app and saw my son sitting on a wooden chair in the middle of a cold concrete room. He wasn't crying anymore. He was talking to one of my guards, a man named Marcus, who had a way of making people spill their guts without ever raising his hand. I turned up the volume. "She had a friend," Tyson was saying, his voice hollow, echoing in the basement. "A guy she met at the gym. She called him Leo. He was always giving her advice on how to manage the old man. He's the one who told us about the beta blockers. He said it was the only way to get the equity before the market turned. He even brought the crust for the pie tonight. Said it was a special gift for my dad's retirement." "And you didn't think it was strange, Tyson?" Marcus asked. "A stranger giving your wife poison?" "I didn't want to know," Tyson whispered, burying his face in his hands. "I just wanted the debt to go away. I just wanted Tiffany to stop screaming at me. I thought if he died peacefully we could start over. I didn't think he was trying to kill all of us." I closed the app. The peacefully part was what stuck in my throat. My son had been willing to settle for a quiet murder. He was so weak he couldn't even handle the reality of his own malice. We pulled up to the gates of the Vance estate 20 minutes later. It was a sprawling colonial mansion tucked behind 10-foot stone walls and enough wrought iron to build a battleship. The gates were closed, but I didn't tell Reggie to stop. "Ram it?" Reggie asked, his hand tightening on the steering wheel. "No," I said. "I installed these gates for Vance back in Chinwitam. He was one of my first major commercial clients before he got into the development game. He never changed the emergency override code. He's too arrogant to think anyone remembers the bypass." I leaned forward and punched a sequence into the keypad mounted on the SUV's dash, which was connected to my master frequency hub by Bonhai Chin. My wife's birthday, and the year we bought our first house. The heavy iron gates hummed and swung open with a slow, mocking grace. We drove up the winding driveway, the headlights cutting through the fog. The house was lit up like a Christmas tree, but there was no holiday cheer here. I saw guards in black tactical gear flanking the front stairs. They looked confused as our SUV rolled to a stop right in front of the main entrance. I stepped out of the car before Reggie could protest. I didn't have a gun. I didn't have a vest. I just had a flannel shirt, a pair of worn-out boots, and 40 years of knowing how things were put together. The guards moved toward me, their hands on their holsters. "Who the hell are you?" the lead guard barked. "I'm the man who built the floor you're standing on," I said, not slowing my pace. Tell Sterling Vance that Cyrus Blackwood is here to collect the trash. And tell Leo Thorne that his special gift didn't quite sit right with me." The guard hesitated. The name Blackwood carried weight even here. Before he could respond, the massive oak front doors opened. Sterling Vance stood there, looking every bit the Gilded Wolf. He had a glass of cognac in one hand and my ledger in the other. Behind him, standing in the shadows of the foyer, was Tiffany. She looked like a trapped animal, her hair disheveled, her eyes darting between Vance and me. But it was the man standing to Vance's right who made my pulse spike. Leo Thorne. He looked older, sharper, like a piece of flint that had been used to start too many fires. He was smiling a thin, oily grin that made me want to wash my hands. "Cyrus," Vance called out, his voice smooth and condescending. "You really are like a bad penny. You just keep turning up. I was just telling Leo here that your daughter-in-law is a fountain of information. We've been having a very productive evening." "You're holding a book of lies, Sterling," I said, stopping at the base of the stairs. "And you're standing next to a man who tried to kill me, my son, and the very woman who's currently trying to sell you my soul. Leo didn't just poison the pie for me. He poisoned the crust for everyone. If you'd all shared that meal like a happy family, you'd be sitting in a morgue right now instead of a foyer." Tiffany's head snapped toward Leo. "What? Leo, what is he talking about? You said the crust was just organic flour." Leo didn't look at her. He kept his eyes on me. "Always the dramatic one, Cyrus. You always were better at building things than you were at keeping them. You should have stayed in the basement. It would have been a lot less painful." Vance looked at the ledger, then at Leo, a shadow of doubt crossing his face. He was a shark, but he wasn't a suicide bomber. He liked his money, but he liked his life more. "Is this true, Thorne?" Vance asked, his voice dropping an octave. "Are you playing your own game here?" "I'm playing the only game that matters, Sterling," Leo said, his hand moving slowly toward the small of his back. "The one where I don't have to share the spoils with a hack developer and a washed-up contractor." I saw the movement. I didn't wait for him to draw. "Reggie, now!" I shouted. But I didn't know yet that Vance's estate wasn't the only place Leo Thorne had infiltrated. As Reggie stepped out of the SUV, he didn't point his weapon at Leo. He didn't point it at the guards. He pointed it at me. "I'm sorry, Cyrus," Reggie whispered, his voice trembling slightly. "But $50 million is a lot of money, and my daughter's tuition isn't going to pay itself." The world didn't just tilt, it inverted. My oldest friend, the man who had been the Omega to my Alpha, the man who knew every secret I had, was standing on the other side of the line. I looked at the barrel of the gun, then up at Reggie's face. I didn't feel the fear I expected. I felt a strange, hollow sense of completion. The collapse was finally total. "You too, Reggie?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "He's been on the payroll for 6 months, Cyrus." Leo laughed, stepping down the stairs. "Who do you think told me about the beta blockers? Who do you think made sure the Omega Protocol didn't include the local police?" I was standing in the middle of a circle of wolves, and the only man I'd trusted with my life had just pulled the trigger on my heart. But as Leo reached for the ledger in Vance's hand, a massive explosion rocked the back of the estate. The Omega Protocol wasn't just a security team, it was a dead man's switch. And I had just triggered the final phase. The orange glow from the explosion at the back of the estate painted Reggie's face in a flickering, hellish light. The heat from the blast rolled over us a split second later, a warm pressure wave that smelled of incinerated gas and high-end landscaping. Behind him, the secondary wing of Sterling Vance's mansion was already beginning to roar with a hunger that only structural failure can provide. I didn't know it yet, but the fire was the kindest thing that was going to happen to anyone on this property tonight. I looked at the barrel of the gun in Reggie's hand. It was steady. For 40 years, I'd watched those hands draft contracts, pour drinks, and carry my son when he was a toddler with a scraped knee. I'd seen those hands hold the Bible at my wife's funeral. Now, they were holding a Bonmuilum caliber death warrant aimed directly at the center of my chest. "Reggie," I said, my voice sounding more disappointed than afraid, 40 years, you were the only man who knew where I kept the keys to the kingdom. You were the one who told me that a man's word is his only real currency. When did your exchange rate drop so low?" "Don't do that, Cyrus," Reggie hissed, his eyes darting toward the burning wing of the house. The sirens were audible now, wailing in the distance, but they were still miles away. "Don't play the moral high ground with me. I spent 4 decades being the help, I was the man in the expensive suit who did the dirty work so you could keep your hands clean and play the humble contractor. I watched you build a $50 million empire while I billed you by the hour. Do you have any idea what it's like to be the architect of a shadow and never get to stand in the sun? I gave you a partnership, Reggie. I gave you a percentage of every trust we built. Pennies, he screamed, and for the first time, the mask of the professional lawyer cracked. Percentages are for employees, Cyrus. I wanted the throne. Leo approached me 6 months ago. He showed me how you'd been hiving off the real profits into the St. Jude's trust money that should have been ours. You were going to give it all away to orphans and leave us with the scraps. I'm 68 years old, Cyrus. I don't have another 40 years to build a legacy. I'm taking mine tonight. I looked past him to Leo Thorne. Leo was holding the ledger, watching the two of us with the detached amusement of a man watching two dogs fight over a bone he'd already poisoned. Sterling Vance, the gilded wolf, looked significantly less composed. He was staring at the fire, realizing that the Omega Protocol didn't just mean a security team. It meant the physical destruction of the property. My house, Vance yelled, clutching his cognac glass so hard it shattered in his hand. You blew up the server room. Blackwood, you crazy old bastard. You just destroyed the records for every deal I've made in the last decade. That was the point, Sterling, I said, not taking my eyes off Reggie. The Omega Protocol isn't a rescue mission, it's a scorched earth policy. If I go down, the ledger isn't the only thing that burns. Every server, every backup, every digital trail connecting me to you, to Leo, and to Reggie is being erased as we speak. I'm not just losing my empire, I'm taking yours with me. I hadn't planned for my heart to break twice in one night, but watching Reggie's face fall as he realized the leverage he'd killed for was evaporating in real time almost made me pity him. Almost. Tiffany, who had been huddled near the door, saw her opening. She wasn't thinking about the money anymore. She was thinking about the air in her lungs. She bolted down the stairs, trying to run past me toward the darkness of the driveway. Tiffany, stop, I shouted. She didn't listen. She didn't see the man in the black tactical gear who stepped out from behind the burning hedge. It wasn't one of Reggie's men, and it wasn't one of mine. It was a third player, someone Leo Thorne had brought in as his own personal insurance policy. The man didn't use a gun. He used a heavy, tactical taser. The crackle of the electricity was loud, and Tiffany let out a short, sharp cry before her body went rigid and she collapsed into the gravel. She lay there, twitching, the aesthetic life she'd murdered for, finally reduced to a heap of designer fabric in the dirt. Now, Leo Thorne said, stepping down the stairs, ignoring the chaos. He pointed a finger at the ledger. The digital trail is gone, but the physical one is right here. This book has the offshore keys, Reggie, the hard-cold access. We don't need the servers if we have the physical codes. Sterling, get your men to secure the perimeter. We're leaving. Reggie, I said, my voice low and urgent. Look at him. Look at Leo. Do you really think he's going to share that book with you once you pull that trigger? He poisoned the pie for my whole family. He's already killed me in his mind. You're just the guy holding the gun for him. The moment I'm dead, you're the only witness left. He'll put a bullet in you before you even reach the car. Reggie's hand wavered. I saw the doubt creeping into his eyes. He knew I was right. He'd spent 40 years reading people, and he knew that Leo Thorne was a snake that would bite the hand that fed it the moment the belly was full. He's lying, Reggie, Leo shouted. He's trying to get inside your head. He's been doing it for years. Kill him, and let's go. I can't do it, Leo, Reggie whispered, but the gun didn't drop. He's right. I know him. He doesn't bluff about the endgame. If he triggered the wipe, that ledger is a trap. I took a slow, deliberate step toward Reggie. I didn't care about the gun. If my life was going to end here, on the driveway of a man I despised, at the hand of a man I'd loved, then let it happen. But I wasn't going to die cowering. The book is a decoy, Reggie, I said, my voice steady. Open it. Look at page 52. Leo Thorne snarled and tried to pull the book away, but Vance, suddenly suspicious, grabbed Leo's wrist. Let him look, Thorne. If Blackwood is telling the truth, we're all holding a grenade. Vance snatched the ledger and flipped it open to the back. He scanned the pages, his eyes darting frantically. He reached page 52 and froze. It's empty, Vance whispered. The whole second half of the book. It's blank. It's not blank, Sterling, I said, a cold smile finally reaching my face. It's printed in thermal reactive ink. The moment the temperature in this area rose above 100 degrees thanks to the explosion I just triggered, the ink began to fade. By the time you get to a safe house, that ledger will be nothing but 300 pages of expensive, blank stationery. The silence that followed was absolute, save for the crackling of the fire. Leo Thorne's face turned a shade of purple I'd never seen on a human being. He realized that 40 years of my life hadn't been recorded in a book he could steal. It was recorded in my head. I was the ledger. "You son of a bitch," Leo screamed. He reached for his own weapon, but he was too late. The sirens weren't in the distance anymore. They were at the gates. But they weren't police sirens. They were the deep, rhythmic air horns of fire trucks, and behind them, the silent, terrifying approach of unmarked black sedans. The Federal Bureau of Investigation. I hadn't just been cooperating with an investigation for 18 months. I had been the one funding it. I had been the one feeding them, Vance's deals, Thorne's skims, and it pained me to admit Reggie's quiet kickbacks. I'd known for months that Reggie was slipping. I just hadn't wanted to believe it until he pointed that gun at me. "Drop the weapons," a voice boomed from a megaphone at the end of the drive. High-intensity spotlights cut through the smoke, blinding everyone on the stairs. Federal agents, hands in the air. The guards Vance had hired weren't paid enough to get into a shootout with the FBI. They dropped their rifles and hit the gravel. Vance followed suit, his cognac glass long forgotten, his gilded wolf persona melting away as he realized his life of luxury was over. But Leo Thorne wasn't going quietly. He grabbed Tiffany from the ground, hauling her up and pressing a small, concealed pistol to her head. "Back off," he yelled, his voice cracking with desperation. "I'll kill her. I swear to God, I'll take her with me." Tiffany, half-conscious and terrified, began to weep. She looked at me, and for the first time in her life, I didn't see the socialite. I saw a girl who had played a game she didn't understand and was now staring at the Reaper. I looked at Reggie. He was still standing there, his gun lowered, staring at me with a look of pure, unadulterated shame. "Reggie," I said softly, "you can still be the man Beatrice thought you were. You can't save the money, and you can't save your career, but you can save that girl." Reggie looked at Tiffany, then at Leo, then back at me. I saw the 40 years of our friendship flash through his eyes. I saw the man who had pulled me out of that trench in Baie-Muy-Bonne. He didn't say a word. He didn't look at the FBI. He turned his weapon toward Leo Thorne and fired. The shot was clean. It hit Leo in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending his pistol flying into the grass. Tiffany collapsed again, sobbing, but she was alive. Reggie didn't fire a second shot. He dropped his gun into the gravel and put his hands behind his head. He looked at me one last time and gave a small, sad nod. "The Omega Protocol," he whispered. "You always did like a dramatic finish, Cyrus." As the agents swarmed the driveway, pinning Leo Thorne and Sterling Vance to the ground, I stood there, a 70-year-old man in a flannel shirt, watching the empire I'd built burn to the ground. I'd won. I'd survived the poison, the betrayal, and the wolves. My money was safe, hidden in trusts that no one here could ever touch. My enemies were in chains. But as the agents led Reggie past me toward the black sedans, he stopped. He leaned in close, the smell of gunpowder and regret clinging to him. "You think you know everything, Cyrus," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the shouting. "But check the basement of your ranch, the one where you sent Tyson. There was a reason Leo was so confident about the pie tonight. It wasn't just Tiffany in that kitchen." My heart stopped. "What are you talking about?" "Tyson wasn't the victim, Cyrus," Reggie said, a tear finally rolling down his cheek. "He was the architect. He was the one who called Leo. He was the one who told us about the trusts. He didn't want the equity, Dad. He wanted the whole thing. And he's not sitting in that basement waiting for you. He's sitting there waiting for them." Reggie was pushed toward the car before he could say another word. I stood in the smoke, the realization hitting me like a freight train. I had sent my son to my safe house, the heart of my operation, thinking I was punishing him. I hadn't sent him to a cell. I had sent him to the vault. And as I reached for my phone to call the ranch, the screen went black. The Omega Protocol hadn't just wiped Vance's servers. It had locked me out of my own life. What happened next was the final, brutal twist in a night of blood and fire, because as I looked up, I saw a familiar truck pulling into the far end of the driveway. My truck. The one I'd driven for 10 years. And sitting in the driver's seat, looking at me with eyes that were no longer soft or glassed over with drink, was Tyson. He wasn't crying. He was smiling. and he was holding the physical keys to the St. Jude's Trust, the keys I'd told everyone didn't exist. I didn't know it yet, but the poor contractor wasn't the only one who had been playing a 40-year game. My son had been waiting his whole life for me to burn the world down, just so he could be the one to inherit the ashes. The roar of the fire behind me was a living thing, a hungry beast devouring decades of Sterling Vance's secrets, but the sound that truly broke me was the low, steady rumble of my own truck's engine. I stood there, rooted to the gravel, as my 10-year-old Ford pulled to a stop just outside the circle of FBI floodlights. The driver's side door creaked open, a sound I knew as well as my own heartbeat, and Tyson stepped out. He didn't look like the broken, sobbing mess I'd sent to the ranch 2 hours ago. He didn't look like the drunk, debt-ridden son who couldn't even look his father in the eye over a bowl of poisoned pie. He looked clean. He looked sharp. He looked like a man who had just finished a long day of work and was finally coming home to collect his pay. In his hand, he wasn't holding a drink or a weapon. He was holding a small, weathered leather pouch. My stomach dropped. I knew what was in that pouch. It was the physical master key and the cold storage hardware wallet for the St. Jude's Trust. It was the only thing my digital Omega protocol couldn't touch. It was $50 million of hope, meant for children who had nothing, and it was currently dangling from my son's fingertips like a toy. I didn't know it yet, but I had spent 30 years teaching my son how to be a contractor, only for him to specialize in the one thing I never expected, the demolition of his own father. Tyson walked toward me, ignoring the FBI agents who were busy wrestling Leo Thorne into the back of a sedan. In the chaos of the fire and the raid, he moved like a ghost, someone who belonged there, yet was invisible to the law. He stopped 3 feet away, the heat from the burning mansion reflecting in his eyes. "You always said I was soft, Dad," Tyson said. His voice wasn't high or frantic anymore. It was calm, chillingly calm. "You said I didn't have the stomach for the struggle. You thought I was drowning in Tiffany's drama because I was too weak to handle her. But I wasn't drowning. I was using her as a screen." I felt the air leave my lungs. "The pie, Tyson. You watched her poison it. You knew Leo had tainted the crust. You were going to let your own father die." Tyson tilted his head, a small, sad smile playing on his lips. "I knew you wouldn't eat it, Dad. You're too paranoid. You've been checking the structural integrity of everyone in your life since I was 6 years old. I knew the moment you smelled that cinnamon, you'd start your little performance. I needed you to fake your death so you'd trigger the Omega protocol. I needed you to wipe the digital trail so that when I took the physical keys, there would be no record left of where the money went." The realization hit me with the force of a sledgehammer. The vultures at the dinner party, the thugs from Viper Capital, even Tiffany's desperate plan to sell me for parts in Mexico, it was all noise. It was a series of orchestrated disasters designed to push me into a corner where I would destroy my own digital empire to save myself. "You used Tiffany," I whispered. "You used your own wife as bait." "She was a liability," Tyson said, glancing back at the heap of designer fabric in the gravel where Tiffany lay, still twitching from the taser. "She was greedy and loud. She made for a perfect distraction. While you were busy being the mastermind and outsmarting Sterling Vance, I was at the ranch. Your guards didn't stop me, Dad. Why would they? They've known me my whole life. I told them you'd sent me to secure the Alpha files. They handed me the keys themselves." He held up the leather pouch. "The St. Jude's Trust. $50 million. You were going to give it to orphans, Cyrus. You were going to give away my inheritance to strangers because you didn't think I was worthy. Well, I'm taking my worth tonight." I looked at my son, and for the first time in 70 years, I felt truly old. I had built an empire on the idea that I was the smartest man in the room. I had hidden my wealth, played the poor contractor, and manipulated everyone around me to ensure my legacy would survive. But I had been so busy watching the wolves at the gate that I hadn't noticed the one I'd raised in my own house. He hadn't just outsmarted me. He had used my own pride as the blueprint for my destruction. "You won't get away with it, Tyson," I said, though the words felt hollow even as they left my mouth. "The FBI, Reggie is a traitor who just shot a man in front of 20 federal agents," Tyson countered. "He's going to spend the rest of his life in a cell. Vance is bankrupt. Leo Thorne is a would-be assassin. And you're a retired HVAC contractor whose son just saved him from a burning estate." He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that was louder than the sirens. "The world thinks you're broke, Dad. And as of 5 minutes ago, When I transferred the first 10 million to a private account in Singapore, the world is right. You're exactly what you've spent 40 years pretending to be. You're a man with a dented truck and a house you don't even own anymore. He reached into his pocket, pulled out my own set of truck keys, and tossed them into the gravel at my feet. Keep the truck, Cyrus. It fits the aesthetic. I'm taking the Mercedes Tiffany left at the gate. I've got a flight to catch, and you've got a lot of ashes to sift through. Tyson turned and walked away. He didn't look back. He didn't offer a final insult. He just melted into the shadows of the driveway, leaving me standing in the smoke of my own life. I watched the taillights of my truck fade into the night as the FBI began to realize that the man they were looking for, the man behind Blackwood Holdings, wasn't the one in the flannel shirt. I sank to my knees in the gravel. The heat from the fire was starting to blister the paint on the nearby sedans, but I felt a coldness that no flame could touch. I had lost everything. My best friend was a traitor. My son was a monster. My legacy was a blank ledger. I had hit rock bottom, and the earth was still giving way beneath me. For a long time, I just sat there. I watched the firemen struggle to contain the blaze. I watched the agents bag the evidence. I watched Tiffany be loaded into an ambulance, her eyes vacant and shattered. I was a ghost in my own tragedy. Nobody talked to me. Nobody asked if I was okay. To them, I was just a bystander, a lucky old man who had survived a robbery. But as the sun began to peek over the horizon, painting the smoke-filled sky in bruised purples and grays, a familiar hand touched my shoulder. I looked up. It wasn't Reggie. It wasn't a federal agent. It was Sarah, the pediatric surgeon, the orphan from the St. Jude's home who I'd mentored for a decade. She was still wearing her scrubs, her face pale with exhaustion and worry. "Mr. Blackwood," she whispered, "I saw the news. I saw the fire. Is it true? Is everything gone?" I looked at her, and then I looked at the black, skeletal remains of Sterling Vance's mansion. I thought about the $50 million Tyson was currently moving across the globe. I thought about the blank pages of the ledger. And then I remembered something Tyson had forgotten. He had the keys, he had the codes, he had the money, but he didn't have the foundation. "Not everything, Sarah," I said, my voice rasping like a saw blade hitting a knot in the wood. I stood up, my knees popping, my back screaming, but my head finally clear. I reached into the hidden cuff of my sleeve and pulled out a small, jagged piece of metal, a simple copper shim I'd taken from my tool belt before dinner. "Tyson thinks he took the vault," I said, a dark, cold spark finally igniting in my gut. "But he forgot that I'm the one who plumbed the building. He took the money, but he didn't take the receipts." "What do you mean?" Sarah asked. "The St. Jude's Trust wasn't just a bank account, Sarah," I said, looking at the charred ruins. "It was a contract. A contract that required a dual signature for any transfer over $1 million. Tyson has my physical key, but he doesn't have my blood." I looked down at the red ink still staining my thumb from the night before. "He thinks he's playing a game of chess, but I'm playing a game of survival. And in survival, you don't need a king, you just need to know where the gas line is." I didn't know it yet, but the revenge I was about to exact wasn't going to be about the money. It was going to be about the one thing Tyson coveted more than wealth: his freedom. I reached for my phone, the one Tyson thought was dead, and I tapped a hidden sequence on the back of the casing. The screen flickered to life. It wasn't connected to the Omega grid. It was connected to something much older, something I'd built before Tyson was even born. "Sarah," I said, "get your car. We're going to the docks. It's time to show my son why you never try to demolish a building while the architect is still inside." What happened next changed the course of the entire city, because Tyson wasn't going to a flight, he was going to a boat. And he didn't realize that I'd owned the dock he was departing from since Mutngin Chin Cham Tamuilam. I had been the invisible man for 40 years. Now, it was time to become the nightmare. The drive to the river was a descent into a world I hadn't touched in years. Sarah drove my beat-up truck with a precision that reminded me of my own younger days, her face illuminated by the green glow of the dashboard. She didn't ask questions. She knew that the man sitting next to her wasn't the kindly old donor who'd paid for her medical school. I was a ghost, returning to the machinery I'd built to haunt the living. The docks at the edge of the city were a labyrinth of rusted shipping containers, flickering yellow industrial lights, and the heavy, metallic scent of the river. This was the graveyard of the city's commerce, a place where things arrived in the dark and left before the sun could witness them. Tyson thought he was being clever by choosing the water. He thought a boat was a clean exit, a way to bypass the airports and the roadblocks I would surely set up. What he didn't realize was that I didn't just own the dock. I had designed the very pier he was standing on back in Tamwichine. I knew every loose plank, every hidden shutoff valve, and every blind spot in the security cameras. To him, this was an escape route. To me, it was a funnel. "Wait here, Sarah," I said as we pulled into the shadow of a warehouse. "If I'm not back in 15 minutes, call the number I just texted you. Ask for the inspector. He'll know what to do." "Mr. Blackwood," she said, her hand reaching for mine. "He's your son. You don't have to do this alone." "He was my son when we were at the dinner table," I replied, my voice as cold as the river mist. "Now, he's just a structural defect, and you don't live in a house with a failing foundation. You tear it down." I stepped out of the truck. My knees didn't ache. My heart didn't flutter. The arrhythmia that Tiffany had tried to exploit was gone, replaced by a steady, rhythmic thrum of adrenaline. I walked toward Pier Muibon, moving through the shadows, like a man who had spent his life navigating the dark. I saw the boat, the Beatrice II. It was a sleek, 60-foot luxury yacht I'd bought for my wife years ago, a vessel she'd only used twice before the cancer took her. I had kept it maintained, a floating mausoleum of a life that could have been. And there was Tyson, standing on the aft deck, bathed in the blue light of his laptop screen. He was frantic now, his fingers flying across the keys. He was trying to finalize the transfer. He was trying to move that $50 million into the Singapore account, and he was running into the wall I'd built before he was even born. I stepped onto the pier, the wood groaning under my boots. I didn't try to be quiet. I wanted him to hear me coming. I wanted the sound of my footsteps to be the last thing that made his blood run cold. Tyson's head snapped up. He squinted into the darkness, his face pale and sweating under the industrial lights. When he saw me, he didn't reach for a weapon. He reached for the hardware wallet, clutching it to his chest like a holy relic. "How?" he gasped. "The gates, the FBI. You were supposed to be trapped in Vance's graveyard." "I built the graveyard, Tyson," I said, walking slowly up the gangplank. "Did you really think I'd let you leave on your mother's boat? The boat I named after the woman who spent her last breath telling me to take care of you?" "Stay back," Tyson yelled, backing toward the railing. "I have the keys. I have the codes. The money is already in transit. I just need to authorize the final tier." "Then do it," I said, stopping 5 feet from him. I crossed my arms, looking at him with a pity that cut deeper than any insult. "Authorize it. Show me how much you've learned from your old man." Tyson turned back to the laptop, his breath coming in ragged hitches. He smashed the enter key. A red box flashed on the screen, accompanied by a sharp, digital chime of rejection. "Error. Secondary biometric required." "What is this?" Tyson screamed, shaking the laptop. "I bypassed the digital locks. I have the physical key. There shouldn't be a secondary." "It's a dual signature system, Tyson," I said. "But it's not a password. It's a blood loop. I designed it with a specialized firm in Switzerland. The hardware wallet you're holding, it has a microneedle in the sensor pad. To authorize a transfer of that size, it needs a fresh sample of the grantor's DNA. My DNA." Tyson looked at the wallet, then at his own thumb, then at me. The realization dawning on his face was a masterpiece of horror. He had the vault, he had the keys, but he was missing the one thing he had tried so hard to destroy: me. "You're a murderer, Tyson," I said. "Or at least, you tried to be. But the funny thing about killing the man who holds the keys is that you tend to lock yourself out of the prize. If I die tonight, that $50 million doesn't go to Singapore. It triggers a total losses clause. The funds are immediately distributed to 300 different charities across the globe. You'll be the first man in history to kill for a fortune and end up as the world's biggest accidental philanthropist." Tyson's face twisted. The sharp, clean man I'd seen at the mansion vanished, replaced by the cornered, desperate animal from the dining room. He looked at the water, then at the laptop, then at me. "Give it to me," he hissed. "Give me your thumb. Just one scan, Dad. One scan and I'll leave you the house. I'll give you back the truck. I'll even pay off Vance's debts for you. Just let me have this." "You're still bargaining," I said, shaking my head. "You're still thinking like a tenant instead of an owner. You think I care about the house? You think I care about the money? I grew up in a one-room shack in Georgia, with a dirt floor, and a father who worked until his fingers bled. I built this empire to see if you could be better than me. I didn't realize I was just building a bigger cage for your greed. I took a step closer. Tyson lunged, trying to grab my hand, trying to force my thumb onto the sensor. He was younger, faster, but he was hollow. I'd spent 40 years hauling cast iron furnaces and wrestling copper pipe. I grabbed his wrist with a grip that made his bones creak. "I'm not giving you a scan, Tyson," I whispered, leaning in until our foreheads touched. "I'm giving you a choice. Behind you, at the end of this pier, there's a team of federal agents. They aren't here for Sterling Vance. They're here for the person who triggered the Saint Place. Jude's alarm, which happened the second you plugged that wallet into a non-secure network." Tyson's eyes went wide. He looked toward the warehouse, where the first flickers of red and blue were beginning to dance against the corrugated steel. "You set a trap," he whimpered, "the whole time. The ranch, the keys. You let me take them." "I needed you to commit the final act," I said. "I needed the evidence to be undeniable. Theft of a charitable trust, interstate fraud, attempted murder. You aren't going to the kind of prison Vance is going to. You're going to the place where they put the people the world wants to forget." Tyson looked at the hardware wallet in his hand. Then, he looked at me with a sudden, terrifying spark of malice. "If I can't have it," he snarled, "nobody can." He turned and hurled the hardware wallet as far as he could into the black, churning waters of the river. He followed it with the laptop, the expensive machine hitting the water with a dull splash. He turned back to me, a manic, broken laugh escaping his throat. "It's gone, Dad. The keys, the codes, the blood loop. It's at the bottom of the river. You're broke. We're both broke. I'm going to jail, but you're going back to the dirt. How does it feel to be the architect of nothing?" I didn't flinch. I didn't scream. I just reached into my pocket and pulled out a small, identical leather pouch. I opened it and held up a second hardware wallet. "I'm a contractor, Tyson," I said, the blue lights of the police cars finally spilling onto the deck. "The first rule of any job is redundancy. You never have just one set of blueprints. And you never, ever trust a failing structure to hold the weight." I looked at the police officers swarming the pier, their weapons drawn, their voices shouting commands. I looked at my son, who had fallen to his knees, his mind finally snapping under the weight of his own failure. "The money never moved, Tyson," I said. "The transfer you saw on your screen was a simulation, a sandbox I built to see exactly where you'd try to send it. You didn't steal $50 million tonight. You stole a lesson." As the officers tackled him to the deck, his screams of rage echoing off the warehouses, I walked to the edge of the boat. I looked down at the dark water where he'd thrown the decoys. I didn't feel the victory I'd expected. I just felt the silence. But as the lead agent, a woman with a tired face and a badge that gleamed in the strobe lights, walked up the gangplank, she didn't look at Tyson. She looked at me. "Cyrus Blackwood?" she asked. "I am." "We found something at the ranch," she said, her voice dropping. "In the hidden safe, the one your son opened." "I know," I said. "The keys." "No," she said, handing me a small, yellowed envelope that had been tucked inside the pouch Tyson had stolen. "Not the keys. This was taped to the back of the hardware wallet. It was addressed to you. From your wife." I felt my heart skip a beat, a real one this time. My fingers trembled as I took the envelope. I recognized Beatrice's handwriting. It was dated the day she died. I opened it. There was only one sentence written inside, a message from the past that changed the meaning of everything I had done. "Cyrus, don't build the walls so high that you can't see the boy standing outside them. He isn't like you. He doesn't want the empire. He just wants his father." I looked at Tyson, who was being dragged away in chains, his face twisted in a mask of hatred. I looked at the $50 million wallet in my hand. I realized then that the most expensive thing I'd ever built was a lie, and the person I'd spent 40 years protecting was the one I'd destroyed with my own hands. But the final twist wasn't the letter. The final twist was what Sarah said as I walked back to the truck. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, her eyes fixed on the burning estate in the distance. "There's someone else here, someone who wasn't on the boat, someone who's been following us since we left the ranch." I turned around. Standing at the end of the pier, half hidden in the fog, was a figure I hadn't seen in years. A man who looked exactly like I did 30 years ago. A man who wasn't Tyson. "Hello, Cyrus," the stranger said. "I think it's time we talked about the other trust, the one you didn't tell Tyson about." What happened next changed the history of the Blackwood family forever. Because I wasn't the only one with secrets. And the son I'd been at war with wasn't the only child I'd raised. The man standing in the shifting river fog didn't move as the police began to haul Tyson away. He stood with a stillness that was unnerving, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of a heavy canvas coat, the kind I used to wear on job sites back in the 80s. The industrial lights of the pier caught the line of his jaw, and for a second, my breath hitched. It was like looking into a mirror that had been sent back through time. He had my eyes, the same heavy brow, and the same way of standing that suggested he was calculating the load-bearing capacity of the very earth beneath him. I looked at the hardware wallet in my hand, then back at the stranger. The agents were busy, the sirens were a dull roar in the background, but the space between me and this man felt like a vacuum where sound couldn't travel. "The other trust," I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. "You're the one Sarah called the inspector." The man stepped forward, out of the shadows, and into the harsh blue strobes of the police cruisers. He looked to be about 35, older than Tyson, with hands that were scarred and calloused. These weren't the hands of a man who played video games or spent his father's money on leased Mercedes. These were the hands of a builder. "I've been watching the feeds, Cyrus," he said. His voice was deeper than Tyson's, steadier. "I was at the ranch when he broke in. I was the one who let him into the safe. I had to see if he'd actually go through with it. I had to know if the test was finally over." I felt a cold sweat break out across my shoulders. "Test? What are you talking about?" The man reached into his coat and pulled out a worn, laminated ID card. He held it out to me. It wasn't a state ID or a driver's license. It was a birth certificate, encased in plastic, yellowed with age. I didn't need to read the names to know what it was. I remembered the night it was signed in a small clinic in rural Georgia, 3 years before Tyson was even a thought in our minds. "Elias," I breathed. "You and Beatrice made a choice 40 years ago," the man said, his eyes never leaving mine. "You were just starting to make real money. You saw what it did to the developers you worked for. You saw how their kids turned into monsters, fueled by entitlement and greed. You were terrified that your own blood would rot if it was raised in a palace." I remembered the conversation, Beatrice and I sitting on the floor of our first half-finished house, surrounded by sawdust. We had just found out she was pregnant, and we had just closed our first $1 million land deal. We were terrified. We'd seen the silver spoon ruin every family we knew. We made a pact, a desperate, radical pact, that only two people hardened by poverty could conceive. "We gave you to my foreman," I whispered, the memory hitting me like a physical weight. "Elias Sr. He couldn't have children of his own. We told the world you were his. We funded your life through a scholarship trust, but we stayed away. We wanted you to grow up with dirt under your fingernails. We wanted you to be a man before you ever knew you were an heir. And then you took Tyson," Elias said, gesturing toward the squad car where my other son was being shoved into the back seat, a nephew from Beatrice's side. "An orphan you thought you could raise properly, because you already had your safety net in me. You thought you could have it both ways, Cyrus. You wanted a son to love openly, and a son to keep as a spare in the shadows, just in case the first one failed." The cruelty of my own logic, 40 years later, felt like a noose tightening around my neck. I had treated my children like a construction project. I had built a model home with Tyson, and a structural backup with Elias. I had manipulated their entire lives to satisfy my own fear of failure. "Beatrice's letter," I said, my hands shaking as I held the yellowed envelope the agent had given me. "She wasn't talking about Tyson. She was talking about you. She wanted you to bring me home 10 years ago, Cyrus," Elias said. And for the first time, I saw a flicker of pain in his eyes. "She wanted the secret to end, but you couldn't do it. You were obsessed with the integrity of the plan. You watched Tyson start to rot, and instead of fixing the problem, you just doubled down on the secrecy. You used me as the inspector, your silent partner, your ghost to monitor the very brother who didn't even know I existed." I looked at the boat, the Beatrice too, and then at the man I had traded for an empire. I had $50 million in a hardware wallet, and I was the poorest man on this pier. "The St. Jude's Trust," I said. "It was never for the orphans, was it?" "It was for the work," Elias replied. "I've spent the last 15 years building those schools, Cyrus. Not with your money, but with my own hands." I used the trust to buy the materials, but I lived in the dorms with the kids. I lived the life you were too afraid to live yourself. Tyson wanted the money to buy the world. I wanted the money to build a better one. That was the real difference. The lead agent walked back over to us, looking between me and Elias. She seemed to understand the gravity of the moment, even if she didn't know the specifics. Mr. Blackwood, we need to transport the suspects to the precinct for processing. We'll need your statement. And his. Elias nodded. I'll be there. I have the recordings from the ranch. Everything Tyson said, everything he did, it's all logged. As the police cars began to pull away, their sirens dying down into a haunting silence, Tyson's face appeared in the window of the last car. He saw me standing with Elias. He saw the resemblance. He saw the way Elias stood, the way I looked at him with a reverence I had never shown Tyson. I saw the moment the final realization hit him. He hadn't just lost his freedom. He had been replaced before he was even born. He let out a silent scream against the glass, his hands clawing at the window until the car disappeared into the fog. 6 months later, the courtroom was a cold, sterile place for a final reckoning. Tiffany sat at the defense table, her designer clothes replaced by a drab orange jumpsuit. She looked older, her skin sallow, the aesthetic she had lived for, completely stripped away. She had tried to cut a deal, offering to testify against Tyson, but the FBI didn't need her. They had the videos. They had the ledger. They had the inspector. Tyson wouldn't look at her. He wouldn't look at me. He sat like a stone, listening as the judge read out the sentences. 25 years for him, 15 for her. Reggie, my oldest friend, received 12 years, his legacy as a pillar of the community erased by his final act of greed. As they were let out, I didn't feel the satisfaction I'd imagined. I just felt a profound, echoing emptiness. I walked out of the courthouse and found Elias waiting for me on the steps. He didn't have a limo. He didn't have a security team. He was leaning against my old Ford truck, the one he'd recovered from the docks. The trusts are being liquidated, Cyrus, he said. The commercial properties, the warehouses, the land, it's all being transferred to the St. Jude's Foundation, for real this time. No shadow accounts, no hidden keys. And you? I asked. What are you going to do? Elias looked at his calloused hands. There's a lot of work to do in Savannah. Some old housing projects that need a complete overhaul. I think I'll head down there. Start from the foundation up. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the keys to the truck. He pressed them into my hand. You should keep this, Dad. It's the only thing you own that's actually honest. He started to walk away, but I grabbed his arm. Elias, wait. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be a father to a man who's already built himself. Elias stopped and looked at me. For a second, the hardness in his face softened. The thing about a building, Cyrus, is that even when it's finished, it needs maintenance. You spend 40 years being the architect. Maybe it's time you just tried being the guy who shows up to help with the repairs. He didn't forgive me. Not that day, maybe not ever, but he didn't walk away entirely. He gave me a dress in Savannah and told me he could use a guy who knew how to fix an HVAC system. I watched him walk down the street, disappearing into the crowd of people who had no idea who he was. He was the invisible man now, the ghost of a legacy I'd almost destroyed. I walked over to the Ford truck and climbed into the driver's seat. The engine turned over with a familiar, growling protest. The interior smelled of old coffee and sawdust. The smell of my life before the millions, before the lies, before the Omega Protocol. I drove out of the city, passing the site where Sterling Vance's mansion had once stood. It was a blackened scar on the earth, surrounded by a chain-link fence. There were no gilded wolves here anymore, just the dirt. I realized then that the ultimate revenge wasn't what I'd done to Tyson or Tiffany. It wasn't the prison sentences or the seized bank accounts. The ultimate revenge was the truth. It was the way the truth strips you naked and leaves you with nothing but your character. Tyson had nothing left. Tiffany had nothing left. But as I reached the city limits, I looked at the passenger seat. Beatrice's letter was sitting there, the ink faded but the words clear. I finally understood what she meant. You can't build a home out of secrets, and you can't protect the people you love by keeping them in the dark. A fortress is just a fancy word for a tomb if there's no one inside it with you. I adjusted the rearview mirror, looking at my own aged, weathered face. I was 70 years old. I was broke by choice. I was a father to a stranger, and a stranger to my son. But for the first time in 40 years, I wasn't hiding. I took the exit for the highway, heading south toward Savannah. I had a truck, a box of tools, and a long road ahead of me. I didn't know if I could fix the wreckage I'd left behind, but I knew one thing for certain. The foundation was finally settled, and for a contractor, that's the only place where the real work can begin. I am Cyrus Blackwood, and I'm finally going home.